Hey, welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. Great to have you with us once again this week. I'm here with Pastor Nick Cady, who is the pastor of Whitefields Community Church here in Longmont, Colorado. And we began a new series, and the series is called I Could Never Believe in a God Who, and we are finishing that sentence for the next few weeks. And this is the second in our series, and this week we're looking at the topic of genocide. I could never believe in a God who condoned genocide in the Old Testament, and definitely not an easy subject to get into. And you can come up from different angles and different people asking different questions about this. But one of the things that we talked about, and you brought it up in the sermon on Sunday, was this kind of idea about, because one of the stories you talked about was when Samuel spoke to Saul, and it was God's command to wipe out all the Amalekites, including women and children. And so specifically children, kind of brought up the idea of the age of accountability. And what about children and they're standing before God? And this is very true today, even as we could even use that word today. There's a genocide happening in our world today, especially here in the United States, as millions of babies have been aborted and been killed and in the womb. And what happens to these kids is a question that people think about. What does the Bible say about babies who are killed?
Yeah, it is a matter of having to deduce what, is trying to interpret, piece together different things, because nothing's said directly about it. But there is quite a bit that we can deduce. Maybe the most famous passage on this subject is from 2 Samuel chapter 12. And this is a bit anecdotal, and it requires some interpretation, but I'll give it to you. What happened here is that David had an affair with Bathsheba, who was one of his military commander's wives. It was a bad thing. He repented of it. She was pregnant, which is what brought it out into the light. And then she gave birth to the child, and the child died within a few days of being born. And in that story there, what happens is we see David, he's fasting, he's refusing to eat, he's praying for his child and wanting to see the child get better. But as soon as the child dies, his officials are afraid to tell him because they're afraid of how he'll react. They're assuming that if they tell him that the child has died, that he'll go into despair or depression, and even deeper than what he's in currently while the baby's sick. And so just the opposite happens. They tell David that the baby has died, and it says that David washes his face and his countenance actually improves. And they say, well, why is he happier to know that the baby's deceased than he was when the baby was sick? And he says, David says, he will not come to me, he will not come back to me, but I will go to him. And again, this requires some interpretation. What is David saying? Is David assuming that he is going to be with God in Abraham's bosom, which is a whole different topic, but let's just say for layman's terms today, in heaven? Is David assuming that, and that he will go to heaven and his child is there in heaven with God? I do actually believe that that's what he's saying. Another interpretation would be that he's just speaking of Sheol as kind of the general term for where dead people go, or the souls of people go when they die. Quite possible. I think, though, that he is referring to some kind of place of comfort with God, where he assumes that his child is, and that he will be there too, because of his relationship with God. That alone is probably not enough to draw any conclusions, but let's see, Romans chapter 1 talks about people being without excuse before God, and the reason why is because they have what we call general revelation. It means that anybody in the world can look out at the world. They have enough innate knowledge to know that there's right and wrong, that there is a God who provides rain and gives air in our lungs and all of these things. There's an order to the universe and the world, and therefore we can deduce at least the fact that there is a God. He's a personal God, he's a good God, and we have sinned and fallen short of his standards, and therefore we need to repent and cast ourselves upon his mercy and ask for him to save us. The question, though, then becomes this: are children capable, of below a certain age, of that kind of rational thought? And, let's say infants, for example. And another really big one in this topic isn't just children, but it is those who are born with, mental disabilities, right? Cognitive disabilities, and they may be not capable of rational thought on that level. Are they condemned purely because of what we call
Like Adam's sin, original sin.
original sin? Yeah. Perhaps. Or perhaps there is a way in which God has mercy upon these people who never really had the capacity to make a choice for or against Jesus. There's another passage in Deuteronomy chapter 1 which talks about children and infants not knowing and not being able to discern between good and evil. And throughout the New Testament, we see that eternal punishment is tied to like known sin, like intentional sin. So all these together, my take on it is that, yeah, I do believe that there is an age of accountability. But I mean, I'm not dogmatic on that. I'm open to maybe I'm wrong about that. But I hope that that's the case, especially when you consider these children, these infants who die, and the aborted babies, and those with disabilities. That's very close to my heart. And I think it would seem in line with the character of God. He's a God who is merciful. You know, when you think about the name of God in Exodus 34, he's merciful, you know, and he talks about that. He's slow to anger. So that's where I land on it. I'm open to, you know, being corrected and shown that I'm wrong, and I'm open to, maybe I'll get to see God one day and he'll be like, yeah, well, that's not how it works, and I'm okay with that. So
Yeah, no, definitely a very important subject, and I think probably dear to a lot of people's hearts. You know, if they lose a baby, maybe stillborn or you know, something like that, then you know they want to know where that baby's going to be, and my hope and dream is that, you know, they will be reunited in heaven with that baby one day. And one of the other things I think you brought up, and you kind of touched on in your sermon, is just the idea that people who make this argument, why would God condone genocide in the Old Testament, seem to kind of want their cake and eat it too, where, you know, when they do see, when they want judgment on this earth, you know, and then when it actually happens, they're like, well, you know, what kind of God would judge people? You know, it's, you know, even just the idea of justice, people seem to be a bit schizophrenic on that idea.
Yeah, and the issue there is really this, like one of the responses we got in our poll, I could never believe in a God who, somebody said, I could never believe in a God who allows good people to die and bad people to live. Well, here we have a case in which we looked at some of the aspects of the Canaanite cultures, right? I mean, rape was regular, child molestation was part of their culture, burning babies on hot iron pans, you know, because they believe it'll make them more prosperous in their life. This was regularly happening, you know, and beyond that, there was more too. And the question is like, okay, well, here are some people doing bad things, and God did end their lives and ended their culture. And so, yeah, again, it's like, well, you were upset when God didn't do something, and now you don't like it when God did do something? Yeah, I think there's some more fundamental issues to this. We remember that, you know, as the author of life, God has the prerogative of when life begins and when it ends. And as we talked about, there's a sense in which you could say, and this is kind of a strange way to put it, but I think it's not inaccurate. There's a way in which you could say that technically God kills everybody, doesn't he? I mean, he's the author of life, and if he controls every breath that we have, and he determines the moment when you die, well, technically he is in control of your death as well. And so it's really just a matter of, you know, God sustains your life, and he can cease sustaining your life. That's his prerogative, and when and how he does that is really up to him. You know, the idea that his mercy is new every morning. He's given me another day. I don't deserve another day. That is his mercy. He's been patient with me for one more day, given me another opportunity. He's given me a mission and calling for today, and to live that out. And so when we see our lives not as something that's owed to us or something that's natural, but as grace and mercy every single day, I think it also changes the way we live.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what was an important takeaway from Sunday's message was fully and truly understanding what justice is, what mercy is, what grace is, and that we can't understand mercy and grace until we truly understand what justice is. So I encourage you to download whitefieldschurch.com. Get over there, download the sermon, share it with your friends, listen to it, meditate on it. It's not a subject that's easily, sewn up in a nice bow and handed to you. It's something to think on and dwell on, and I think it definitely opens your mind to who God is, the character of who God is, and I think it would even show you how gracious and how merciful He truly is to us. So get over there, download that. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and ring the bell on YouTube, and I think we're going on a podcast soon as well. So we'll see you, and we'll hear you everywhere, and we look forward to seeing you again. God bless.